Good morning. We are, for the second time, at the end of the last page of Ayin Beis, page 1477. And what we've been doing, as all of you, I hope most of you know, we finished this Hemshech. However, since the Rebbe Rashab did not conclude the writing of the Hemshech, and we don't really know how much more he would have written, but we do know that there were themes and questions that were left unfinished. So what we did was, after finishing on page 1477, we went and learned firstly the Torah Shalom, Simchas Torah Ayin Daas, a Torah Shalom that helps explain, and some of the topics here primarily about Yichud, the unity, the higher unity, the lower unity, Mamayla Mata, Mamatla Maila, how we understand existence in the context of God. And then we went back to the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, Mik Hashem Elokeinu, Hamagbil L'Sheves, Hamashpili Lires, Imitera Er Mekates Chanukah, with its explanation. We learned that whole thing. And then the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which we're in middle of. And we reached till page 384 in Maimori Admuram Tzoi, Bereshis, also Chanukah Maimer, based on the Torah Er. Why? Because those two Maimor, that Maimer, the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's elaboration, are the basis of much of the themes that we've been learning here. And so therefore, firstly, by going back to those Maimorim, you see context, you see how it developed, which is tremendously helpful in so many different ways, understanding the structure, understanding the question, the answer, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'm just giving more the background. And then also from there we can derive, because there those Maimorim do conclude and they do answer the questions and they do continue the discussion. So there's no question that the Rebbe Rashab, since he based everything until here on those Maimorim, he clearly would have based the rest of it on it. So we can come away with understanding the actual answers to the questions, as well as the continuation of many of the themes that were left unspoken or unwritten, I should say, by the Rebbe Rashab. So what are we talking about? Primarily, I mean, there's many different subtopics, but primarily the focus here is on the transformation of the animal soul, which in many ways is the theme of Ayin Beis, because it's the interface between the divine and existence, and the existence is personified by the animal soul. Existence is a separate identity, a separate consciousness, which ultimately leads to someone driven by self-interest, which is what the animal soul is. Like he said in volume 2, that the tzimtzum, on a microcosmic level, within each one of us, the tzimtzum is the nefesh habamis. He actually said that is the animal soul. So the transformation of the tzimtzum is not just a cosmic abstract concept, it's actually the personal aveda, the personal work that each of us is charged with to transform our own selfish side, our own egocentric personality. Like he says in Tanya, the nefesh habamis, driven by our impulsive emotions, which is in battle, perpetual battle with the nefesh elikiz, the divine soul, which is driven by the reflective mind. And the goal, of course, is not just to conquer and to restrain and tame the animal soul, but to transform it to v'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. That the love of God should not just be the domain of the divine soul, but the divine soul and the animal soul, shnei yitzarecha, b'chol levavcha, your entire heart, the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart, both should be driven by loving God, to love God. In the example that he uses here, and based on the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, that's the Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. The Ner consists of a psila, the wick, the divine soul, which is inserted into the oil, the animal soul, namely its intelligence, shemen, with the goal that the shemen can be focused on using intelligence for worldly matters and physical existence and survival. And we turn the shemen into fuel that is absorbed by and is drawn to, the wick draws that oil to guide it toward what? Toward a flame, a Ner Hashem, a flame which is the fiery passion of Ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. But then, of course, is the obvious question, as he asks in Teir Eir and the Mittler Rebbe and the Ayin Beis. I pointed out several times how that same question is asked, different wording a bit, but this is the general content is how an animal soul is antithetical to the divine soul. It's interested in self. It's not interested in transcendence and the divine. So that leads us to the whole preparation to get to V'haftas Hashem Elokecha. We need Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem. And prior to that, Birchas Yetzer and Birchas Avos Elam, the brachas before Shema, which the Mittler Rebbe focuses on more in his Maimer, and Ayin Beis focused on earlier. But once that, the Psukkah de Zimra, the earlier prayers, prime and warm up, so to speak, the animal soul, then comes the main contemplation. The real Yichud is in Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem, and in Shema itself, the two phrases, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, with a focus on understanding and appreciating, in a way the animal soul can also appreciate, that everything is all part of God's unity. So even though the animal soul has its own interests and it's directed and guided by its own survival, and we will learn this inside the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, nevertheless, it could be educated and inspired to the point that it could be ignited like shemen, to be oil, fuel, to help and actually even propel the divine soul to greater height, greater, deeper levels of loving God. So the main points in this Yichud is, number one, is that nothing the only reality is God. That's what Echad ultimately means. Therefore, existence, yesh ma'ayin, there's nothing in common. The existence is simply created by the reflection of the divine and is nothing in common between it and the Creator. And it's only by a reflection. That's why a reflection does not affect, light does not affect its source. Even light itself is not affected by the place where it shines. That was point number one. Point number two is that the ayin, which is the light, the divine energy that manifests in existence, has two levels. There's the ayin of the yesh amiti, the ayin of the yesh hanivra. In order for the ayin, the light, to be able to be commensurate, to allow and sustain, to create and sustain existence, there's a second level of ayin. They're separated by a parsa, by a partition. And finally, the main point, coming back to that, this partition does not affect God. That from God's perspective, both levels of ayin are two forces, two tracks that God wants to create existence. So from our point of view, from Ishtalshel, there are two levels of ayin, and there's a parsa. But from the divine perspective, existence is just another form of divine expression. It's expressed in a different way than the higher level of ayin. As we learned at length in Ayin Beis, that it's not one ayin, it's two levels of ayin, but not that one ayin comes from the other. They both originate from the source, from the etzem. And from that point of view, it's kel deis avaya, both deis, Daas Elyon, Daas Tachton, are like one. However, they do have two different functions. And that functionality will not be obvious and discernible until there's after the tzimtzum. But the tzimtzum in turn does not affect, there's no tzimtzum in the eyes of God. Like he gave the example with the teacher, that even the intelligence that he's going to convey to a student within the teacher is all part of his one unified reality. And it's just coming down to more a form of expression. So how does existence seen from God's eyes? He said it's all godliness. It's God envisioning existence. Yes, it's true. It's it's existence that he's envisioning, but from his point of view, envisioning, it's all part of one whole, seamless whole. That's where we reached, where we're up to right now on page 1477, which corresponds to the Mittler Rebbe's pages, essentially, basically, I would say 381, maybe 380 through 384, to the top of 384. We talked about these two levels of Ayin, Daas Tachton, Daas Elyon, and how they join together. The Mittler Rebbe's words that Ihu Tofis B'Kula Alma, God contains and defines all of existence, but existence does not define or contain him. Like he elaborated, as we elaborated. So we went back after stopping at the top of page 384 by the Mittler Rebbe. We went back to Ayin Beis, which elaborates a lot more on this whole theme, and that's where we're up to now on page 1477, which I'm going to now hopefully conclude. So the last thing we learned was, like I said, that from Atzmus point of view, from the course point of view, even the Elyon is biyah, even though they are not one like Atzilus with godliness, but he says, but that Yichud, the Yichud b'tachlis, came mamish gam biyah, to the point that also the Kalim of Atzilus and the Kalim of Biyah and the Elyon is biyah, the way they are in God envisioning existence, the Hashara b'keach, where he allocates resources and he envisions existence, it's all there in before the Tzimtzum. It's all there, but it's not a Metzias at all. Yichud b'tachlis. And what he added, another point, was that from that perspective, Bria, he doesn't say it explicitly, but he says Bria is his galus. His galus is not the same as Yesh Ma'ayin. Yesh Ma'ayin means something completely, a paradigm shift. His galus means it's a lakus, but it's coming into a state of revelation and expression. So it appears that from Atzmus' point of view, from Kel Deus Avaya, from Atzmus' point of view, creation is not even Yesh Ma'ayin. It's just an expression of his own power, of his own expression of godliness. And that he keeps emphasizing his galus. Just as it is with the student, with the intelligence within the teacher, that the part that is going to be conveyed to the student also is within him. He already includes it within his intelligence, but in his intelligence, it's a more revealed state. But it's still all one with the teacher. It's not two different realities. So to read the last words that we learned was, and the same with the general creation, including Hashara B'Keich, which is how God envisions existence. Hashara means how God is potentially he is envisioning. Hashara usually means to estimate, but here obviously we're not talking about an estimate as in not exact. But it's like when a contractor estimates the resources he'll need, it gives you an estimate of the costs. So he's looking ahead, seeing what's this project going to cost, and gives you an estimate. So, but the truth is, in Lamaila, you can't call it an estimate. So you call it, he's envisioning what will be. So all this is Hudak B'chinas is Galus Levad. It's from God's point of view, it's just another expression of his. From the creation's point of view, from the art point of view, it's a piece of art. We look at the world around us because we only see the tip of the iceberg, we only see the product. But from the producer's point of view, the product is just an expression of himself. And everything is there, encompassed betachlis hayichud, utter unity. So we have here is a whole different perspective on existence from God through God's eyes. And that's where we stopped, and I'm going to continue reading from the line that starts betachlis hayichud, around let's see, 3, 6, 9 lines from the top of page 1477, the last page of Ayin Beis. I'm happy if anybody wants to clarify anything so far. I'm happy to clarify. We have learned this more than once, quite a few times. Firstly, in Ayin Beis, in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, briefly in the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. But nevertheless, this is very dense and complicated material. So I'm more than happy to review it again as many times as needed, if anybody wants clarification or any explanation on anything. As I said, we're going to finish now the end here, and then we're going to go back, and I'll show you how literally you could see where the Rebbe Rashab stops with the Mittler Rebbe and where the Mittler Rebbe continues, and from there we'll try to extrapolate what the Rebbe Rashab may have written as if he continued writing this Hemshech. Okay.
I actually have a question, Rabbi. and I know we've been over this before. I actually listened to this past class at least 2 times, I think maybe 3 times, and prior classes as well. My question is, the two aspects of ayin, the ayin of the yesh ha'amiti and the ayin of the yesh ha'nivra, can we associate those perspectives of ayin with or sovev versus or mamale, and also can we associate these two perspectives with Shem Havaya versus Shem Elokim, or are these unrelated concepts?
In middle of page 1475, the beginning of the middle paragraph, he says exactly that. He says, in a close erashayich elamis, which means the ayin of the yesh hanivri, he says, and there's the primius lamaila from Gili ala elamis, he says, ubederach klal ubchinas erein sof hasevav klal, erein sof be'erein sof shalifnei atzimtzum. So the Rebbe Rashab himself associated the higher level of ayin to being the root, to being Sevav Kalalman.
Okay.
So if you look at literally second and third and fourth line, the middle paragraph, page 1475, he says that. So there's your answer.
Yeah.
In general terms, obviously, he says B'derech Klal, because obviously Sevav Kalal, Mamala Kalalman is throughout the entire cosmic order relative to each other. But in general, those, Sevav Kalam would then be associated with more transcendent energy, Malkalam more immanent energy relating to existence. As far as Havaya and Elikim go, he doesn't mention it right here, but he does say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And Alter Rebbe in Torah does say Hashem Elokeinu means that the godliness that's beyond existence is one with the godliness within existence. So essentially, I mean, it doesn't, again, spell out exactly the levels, but it's a similar theme that you're talking about two levels of the divine, one beyond and one within, and they're all one. So those in general terms. In the context of Ayin Beis, Hashem Elokim plays a tremendously central role because we're talking about the verse, V'yadaita hayem v'shaves alecha ke'avaya hu Elokim b'shamayim mal v'oz metachas einoid Havaya hu Elokim. So if you go back to the beginning of volume 3, literally the beginning, first page, he speaks about Havaya being the revelation of the divine. Elikim is how it comes through concealment in Elikim. And Havaya and Elikim are one because Elikim really is an expression there to reveal Havaya. And then he says, Einay, that Elikim itself, the concealment itself, also is rooted in the Helema Atzmi, as he goes on to explain Einay. So if you want to connect it in that sense, the broader context, yeah. But right now, he's not so much focusing on those names, even though they will, I think, will reappear in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer as they began, because then this is a contemplation of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we'll continue. The line B'tachlis HaYichud, I said 9 lines from the top of page 1477, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along. Now this is very important. This is how I'll just teach you my own methodology of how I keep track of the beginning and ends of the section, since it's all so much material. So you'll usually find when something begins to be discussed, then it continues, and then the Rebbe Rashab will conclude and say, "V'zeh inyan," and this is the inyan that we talked about. So what we have now tells me that the Rebbe Rashab is going further now. Zein Nikel Deis Havaya, that started on page 1474. After explaining the two levels of ayin, with the parsa in between, on page 1472. Which came to explain the two levels of Yichud, Yichud Elah, Yichud Tata. So on page 1472, he started Kel Deis Havaya, the loy with the vav, the loy with an aleph, which the Mittler Rebbe explains is the godliness beyond existence. Loy, he's beyond existence with an aleph, and loy, he is the what we call niskanu alilis. He's the one that all the work plans, all the workings. So that was how he relates to existence. So then, now he's coming back and said, "V'ze'inyan keil de'es havaya." So that tells us that he finished, and not finished completely, but he explained what he wanted to say about the two levels of Ayin, and in a way he's going back to where the Mittler Rebbe is discussing. Because remember, the Rebbe Rashab, the last 3 pages are really his own addition to the Mittler Rebbe. Earlier, there was actually quotes. He's almost quoting line by line from the Mittler Rebbe with some additions. But the last 3 pages have been really the Rebbe Rashab's own original writing. So now he's going back and saying, so this gives us this is like a signpost that parallels to the idea where the Mittler Rebbe also talks about Keil De'es Havaya on page 383, and the top of 384. And then we're going to go from there back to Shema Yisrael. And the Rebbe Rashab is going to do that briefly, but he's not going to finish. So he says like this: now that we learned all that, how it is from God's perspective, Keil De'es Havaya, that he includes both Deis, like he said before, he includes both Deis as one. Sevel Beis Deis Ke'echad. And explained by Inyan Hu, page 1472. So really, this is the conclusion for 1472. I said 1474, but really it started 1472 to be more specific. So even though the two Deis are opposites, but by God they're not opposites; they're two expressions. She says, "V'ze'inyan keil de'es havaya." The Gabe Atzmus is Baruch. You say keil de'es havaya, referring to the Atzmus, because in relation to Atzmus, Beis Adei Shovin, both perspectives are equal. They're two perspectives that will later become 2 tracks, but they're equal. The Daas Tachton, because Daas Tachton, the lower perspective, which means the Ayin, the Hainu, b'chinas Ayin shalayesh, the Ayin as it relates to the creation, to Yesh, Vayesh and Esava, and the actual Yesh that's created, who b'chinas bitl v'yichud betachlis. From God's perspective, it's completely bottled. From our perspective, it's not completely bottled, because we have the tzimtzum and we have to contend with all the different concealments and climb and retrace the steps. But from Gabi Atzmus, he says, Gabi Atzmus is Baruch, Daas Tachton is unified with the core, just like we said with the teacher. The idea that he has in his mind that he's going to convey to the student is one with the idea as he understands it himself. And at that point, you can't even distinguish between the two. Then he'll employ a tzimtzum, which will convey to the student only the lower, the chetzenius, the tip of the iceberg. But from the iceberg's point of view, it's not a tip. It's just part of the iceberg. It's only from the outsider's point of view that it's a tip of the iceberg, using that a classic cliche. So it's beginnes bittel v'yichud betachlis k'moya ayin shel yesh amiti. Why should it be less bottle to the Atzmus than the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti? From God's perspective, he simply, like I gave the example of the interior minister of the king and the exterior minister. I'm using the word exterior because Pnimius Echetzenis, but the interior minister and the foreign minister. When they're in the presence of the king, and he gives instructions that you go and collaborate or negotiate with the diplomacy with other countries. So you have to leave the palace to travel. And the interior minister, whose job is to run the show and run the empire from within the internal. From the king's point of view, these are just 2 different ministers, 2 different functions. But they're both the king's servants. They're both the king's ambassadors. And as such, the Yichud is betachlis. So that's what Keil De'es Havaya means. So by us, there are 2 Deis, there are 2 perspectives. We see existence, and from existence, we come to understand that something created this existence, and there's a divine energy within it, and we slowly climb and understand that the divine is beyond existence, and so on. This is step 1, the steps that we go from the bottom up. But from God's perspective, where it all began, there was the other way around. There was Atzmus and only Atzmus. Atzmus wants to create existence. He wants to dir b'tachtein. So he creates Hoyahu Shmei Belvad, Actually Nivrael, a Shmei, a form of expression. He wants to express himself. Before that, not in time, but conceptually, there's no such thing as expression altogether. Like we spoke, there's no there's no expression, there's no gili, there's no consciousness, no awareness. It's not necessary. You just have a netzem, a reality that's just a reality. It doesn't need expression. But then he chooses, he wants the expression. His expression is also part of who he is. It's not a separate entity. So from that point of view, existence is only part of God's form of expression that he chose to express himself. Okay. So therefore, the both deists come together as one. It's still two deists, because one is an energy, an expression that's beyond existence, and the other expression is going to relate to existence. But from God's point of view, they're both as one. That's the key point he wants to make. That's why he said it's not one level of ayin, it's two levels of ayin. But not that one ayin comes from the other, but they both come from the original. So the yichud, when you say echad, the yichud is total and seamless and complete. To put it in different words, if the ayin of the Yesh Nivra was a separate level, so to speak, and came from the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, ultimately the Nefesh Abamis could say, you know what? Yes, I understand God created me, but I'm somewhat of a separate entity. He gave me certain separateness. But if you know that from Atzmus' point of view, there's no separateness. Even what you think is separate is only from your perspective. So the unity, you are one mamish, even though you've now playing the role of the animal soul, like the role of the Yesh, that is in existence with its own consciousness. From that perspective, it's all part of that oneness of the divine. Okay. Now, going very slowly here, because we're literally coming to the end of Ayin Beis, and so now you'll see he's going to begin to go back into Shema. And I was looking closely to see how this parallels Mittler Rebbe, and it does parallel. If you look on page, I'm just comparing the language the Rebbe Rashab is going to say now. So that's Kel Deis Havaya from Atzmus' point of view. But remember, all of this is not just to teach us how God sees it. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, is Shema Yisrael. It's a message to us. So it's one thing to tell us how God sees existence. That's what we've been learning till now. But how about us? Can we also see it that way? Because you can make the argument, fine. You told us the truth. The total truth is there's no tip of an iceberg. It's all one iceberg, so to speak. It's all part of one divine unity. But what about the rest of us? What about us from our perspective? We know there are two levels. So when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we're commanded to experience and contemplate and experience this aspect of Yichud, not just Yichud Taton, Yichud Elyon, Daas Tachton and Daas Elyon, but also the Yichud of both Yichudim. That's the next line now. Because till now he hasn't said that. Till now he just explained the concept. But how about now Yisrael? What do we do? And the answer is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. God is saying, I want you to unite, to experience, to unite the two levels of unity and understand it as I understand it, as much as possible, obviously. So I was looking, because this is such a key transition, because he's going back to Shema. And as I said, as we're trying to reconstruct Ayin Beis, or you could say deconstruct Ayin Beis, based on how it was first written by the Mittler Rebbe, and before that, the Alter Rebbe. So if you go to page 383, you'll see the Mittler Rebbe does similar. After explaining Daas Tachton, Daas Elyon, he now goes back and says, and now that also applies to us, meaning Yisrael, also to Neshamas Yisrael, to our Avodah. And where's that? To be exact, let us see here. Okay, the Yichud of the two Daas Elyon and Daas Tachton is page 382 and 383. Then he goes like this. 1 second. So he starts talking about the hasaga, that the main yichud is the hasaga of these two levels and their unification. And he repeats that as well. I'm just looking for key lines here. So I'm looking now on page 383 of the Mittler Rebbe. Yeah, that's all one. Not a kriach nivdal. Kel deis. Olav kach amar kikel deis havaya shesevel beza deis. Okay, so he encompasses both because they're both as one. And then, yeah. So then on top, And Elazeh ain't hefresh klal ben Yichud Elyon Yichud Tata. Top of page 384, where we stopped. Then he continues. V'zeu klolasin Yichud Elikuz bepasha Shema Yisrael. So now he takes us back to Shema Yisrael. This parallels where we are right now in the Rebbe Rashab. So if I were to say, till now, the last 3 pages were the Rebbe Rashab's addition, explaining further what the Mittler Rebbe said. But now, when he starts saying the next line that we're going to learn now, parallels to the beginning of the paragraph on 384, which we didn't learn yet. We'll go back to. That's why I wanted to do exactly what we're doing right now. So we're seeing how the Rebbe Rashab is explaining it. So now let's continue in Ayin Beis. U'kamoi came, just as it is above and from Atzmus point of view. This is a very key transition line because he hasn't said that till now. Till now, literally from the beginning of page 1466, where he began the topic of Shema, he went off to first the whole contemplation of Yesh Ma'ayin and the 2 levels of Ayin and the Parsa and now the Kel Deis Havaya. So now he's taking us back. He says this is also the Yichud Lamata. No, it's not just the way it is Legaba Atzmus Daas Baruch, like he said 3 lines before. The Yichud Lamata b'Neshamas Yisrael, that Neshamas Yisrael below, when we are contemplating and we're saying Shema, Shemiyachdim Eisei Baruch. So we know we have the mitzvah. This is a mitzvah that he called earlier a fundamental mitzvah that is the foundation of all mitzvahs. He said that mitzvah say Yichud Elikus. He said, which by the way, in answer to your question, Seva Klam, Amal Klam, he said that as well on page 1466. I see. Yichud Eloi, Seva Klam, Yichud Etab, Amal Klam, and Biyachid both Yichudim. Zeu Yisod Kol HaMitzvahs, Kutchebrich, Yichud Kutchebrich V'Shchinta. So now he's going back and saying, so therefore we have a mitzvah to miyachid. The mitzvah miyachid meisha is bar b'chinas yichud elav yichud tata. This is taking us back to page 1466 to be miyachid both yichud tata, yichud tata, the 2 levels of yichud. First, that there's a yesh, but the yesh is created by God and sustained by godliness. Yichud elav is that from God's point of view there is no yesh altogether. So he says, these 2 levels of Yichud is what? Is understanding the 2 levels of Ayin that we learned earlier, is bar leil, as was explained earlier, starting from page 1466, but especially in the last few pages. So, same thing, just as we have a mitzvah to miyachid, both Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah, so just as from Atzma's point of view, these 2 are like one, he says, Hinei tzrichim liyachid. Kamei Kain. Also, the Yichud of Neshamas Yisrael Lamata is not just enough, the first level of Yichud, and the second, but Tzrichim Yachid Gam Beza Yichudim Hanal. We have to also find a deeper unity, because Yichud is unity, but it's still 2 levels of unity. And you want to have a seamless unity, as it is from Atzma's point of view. So that's why we also have the command to be Yachid both these Yichudim, the Mahava Echad Be'echad. The expression Mahava Echad Be'echad, which is used in a Kagavna, we say it. Echad Be'echad, but here he's using it to explain Hainu Shabchinis Yichud Tato Echad Be'echad, that the first level of unity, which means Yichud Tato B'chinis Yichud Mamish Kama Yichud Elah. It's not really 2 levels at the end of the day. It's Mamish the same Yichud Mahava Echad of Yichud Tato Be'echad of Yichud Elah, that they're 2 like one from Atzmus point of view, and we too have to miyachid it that way. So you could make the case that maybe mitzad Atzmus they're 1, but from our point of view they're 2. 2 levels of Ayin. Now initially they are, because that's what the Tzimtzum does. The seichel of the teacher and the seichel of the student that is conveyed to the student are 2 levels. But ultimately our goal is to climb and retrace the steps where we see how they become 1 in the teacher's mind, or in this case, 1 in God's perspective. So that now is key, because now we're being told that we can reach this level, which, as I said, is a chiddush. Because you can make the argument this is a level that we, the yesh, can reach. You know, to reach Yichud Elah is also a big chiddush, not just Yichud Tata, not just Daas Tachton. Because Daas Tachton, everyone understands. Every person can live their lives and recognize that your life is a blessing of God's. And therefore, you should be serving God all the time. But that doesn't negate the yesh. That says the yesh is aligned. Like we said, bittul yesh. But bittul mitzias of Yichud law is also quite an achievement. But here we're going even further. That even bittul yesh is really just one with bittul mitzias, because from Atzmus' point of view, the whole yesh is just an expression of the divine. Now, obviously, this takes a lot of avodah, because if you reach Yichud Tato, you could also be quite happy. That's also an achievement, to live your whole life, that your whole life is aligned with godliness. So you understand these two, the Yichud law and then the combination of the both, are not just a simple matter. But still, as I said, we're coming to the end of Ayin Beis here. So the Rebbe Rashab is taking us all the way to the highest point possible of what we ultimately can be expected to achieve. And obviously, when Mashiach comes, when everything will become revealed below as it is above, the Dira b'Tachtenim, in the Tachtenim, they're called Tachtenim, we're going to have the Gilead Atzmus. So it's not, so the concept we have learned, but of course the challenge here is not the concept of it, the theory, it's how to actually do it and reach a level like that, which brings us back to something I always point out in applying to this, that every person has to find relative to their level all these three levels: Yichud Tata, Yichud Law, and the combination of both. And you can find examples of it. Just like a person, you can be serving God and be very dedicated on a daily basis. Comes Yom Kippur, most people reach a higher level of, you can say, spiritual awareness or higher level of divine consciousness. And then on that itself, there can be a third level where it becomes all like one. So we could find in our lives, I don't want to go there right now because that requires its own discussion, how we apply this in our Avodah. But since he's saying that it's also Neshamas Yisrael Lamata have this mitzvah to be miyachid, shemiyachdim esei, and he's saying clearly, tzrichim liyachid both yichudim. I want to underscore that very clearly. He's saying that the whole discussion I'm having here is not just to tell us how Atzmus sees things, to tell us that we, too, are obligated, are charged with reaching an awareness of that nature, even though it may be relative to our level and not quite necessarily how Atzmus Mamish sees it, but it's expected for us at least to try to understand as best as possible this third level of where both come as one, Kel Deus Havaya, which, as I explained many times, is what Chassidus wants. Chassidus does not suffice, wants it all, basically. So if Hashem revealed to us Kel Deus Havaya, why did he tell us this? So from Chassidus' point of view, it's because Torah is Lashon Hira. He didn't just tell us a piece of information. I want you to know how I see things. If he tells us how he sees things, it means he wants us to see it to some extent in that way. And that's very much what is all contained in the last few lines that we just read.
Can you take a question? Sorry, go ahead, Robin.
Just one second. I just want to make sure I finish the right sentence before, 1 second. I'll stop for questions. Just give me a second. I mean, if you allow me, I would read a few more lines because he explains what he just said. So let's just read a few lines and hold your question if you don't mind for another minute. So he says like this, V'hainu. And this means that even that we have to reach this level that Yichud Ta is one with Yichud Law. This means the B'chinas Ayin Shala Yesh, who gam Atzmus is Baruch. Like we learn. So God knows that, that's a given. We too need to come to understand that the ayin of the yesh, even though it went through a tzimtzum to allow us to exist, but we can see beyond the tzimtzum if we work hard enough. In other words, we can take the ayin back to its root. And what is its root? Is gam atzmus ezbarach. Where did the ayin of the yesh amiti originate from? He made it clear before. It didn't originate from the ayin of the yesh amiti. I mean, it traveled through there. But they both were willed by God. He said clearly, God wanted both from the outset. So you can then trace the steps back. So and there is completely united with him. And from Atzmus' point of view, even though from our point of view it came with a distance and separate, that was the whole point of the tzimtzum and the parsa and the partition. But from Atzmus, because the tzimtzum doesn't in any way interrupt or conceal or pause or in any way separate between Atzmus and this ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. It's only from our point of view. And all this can be expected from us to come to understand. Not initially, because initially the student has to understand what the teacher is teaching him so he can begin the journey. But ultimately, that's what he's saying. So Yichud Tata is just like Yichud Law ultimately. Valkain. And therefore, Gam Kamosha Baba is Galus. So even how that ayin of the Yesh HaNivra came and was revealed to be an ayin that relates to existence, how do you miyuchad betachlis ba'atzmusei? It's completely united utterly with Atzmus. That's even the ayin. Ubamele k'moy kein gam kol mashen nisava. Not just the elikus that manifests relative to existence, the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, but the nivra itself, the Yesh itself. Hakol b'chinas hamshachim in Atzmus. Everything is a transmission from Atzmus. Umiyuchad b'yizborach betachlis hayichud. And it's utterly united, seamlessly united with him in utter unity. That's why he said before, it's only revealed. It's only came into a revealed state. In other words, Atzmus itself is beyond revelation and beyond expression. Then Atzmus expressed himself. And one of the ways he expressed himself is to want to create an Oyer that relate to existence and to want to create existence. So existence, from his point of view, is just an expression of Atzmus. So even though I would like to go further, but here I will stop because the next few lines is a little more addition to this. But this sums up what now we, Neshamas Yisrael Lamata, also when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, what we arrive at, which is what he's going to explain the next few lines, how it's all included in Shema. So let me stop here if anybody wants to ask any questions. And then maybe I'll read till the end today. Go ahead.
If I may, Rabbi, I had two questions. One is, you told us that then when the Rebbe Rashab was on his deathbed, he was trying to unite Yehuda Elah and Yehuda Tata, right? To do the third thing. Is that, if...
I don't know if he was trying. That was what came out of his lips when he was in his sleep. He was speaking about it.
I see.
Now, that means he was probably reaching that level, I would assume.
Okay, all right. Because I was going to say, if the Rebbe
exactly.
Rashab is, what are we supposed to do? That's one thing, but okay.
Well, didn't I say that it's all relative to each one of us?
Yes.
We say every day in Shema, B'chol moedecha, with all your might, with all your you. You get out of your comfort zone, that's your moedecha. The Rebbe Rashab is getting out of his comfort zone. Obviously, is a lot different than us. So everything is relative. That's the simple answer.
Okay.
We don't have to be the Rebbe Rashab. We need to find, when we say Shema, this unity. So we have to find basically three forms of connecting to God. Daas Tachton, Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah, and the Yichud of both. So you need to figure out, how can I see those three in my personal life? That's basically how I would phrase it.
Okay, like Reb Zusha, who was afraid he was going to ask, why weren't you more like Reb Zusha?
Yeah, but a step further, you have to actually find these three. I have no doubt that any one of you apply yourself, and especially if you speak to a mashpia, you can find relative to your own level these three levels. It's not that difficult to identify.
Okay, my second question was, if we're able to view these things the way Atzmus can view it, aren't we going to be nullified if we get to that level? How do we still maintain our usness? How do we not get
separate identity?
Can you? Do you think, if you gave it some thought, do you think you could figure that out? I'm saying it because I've explained this, I don't know, many, many, many times. And to me, it's like, to me, it's obvious, but I wanted to know, if you give it a little thought, do you have any idea how you answer that second question?
I'll have to give it some thought. On the spot, I don't think.
I'll help you out.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you'll probably remember that this was discussed. A teacher, you could ask the same question like this. If you take a 5-year-old child and try to teach that 5-year-old everything that a genius knows, okay? the child will not be able to contain any of it, right? Be overwhelmed, as you just said. Will basically, I don't want to say annihilate, but you'll definitely overwhelm the child and completely confuse them, right? We agree? Now, so what do? You start teaching them Aleph Beis, A, B, C. Let's learn A, B, C. Let's learn how to read, how to put together a word, how words come together and create a sentence, and a sentence creates a phrase, and a phrase a paragraph, and a paragraph a chapter, and a chapter a volume. Now, this same 5-year-old, turn the clock forward, can not only learn everything his teacher knows, he could surpass his teacher. So he'll say, 1 second, didn't you say if you taught him all of that, he'd be overwhelmed and he wouldn't be able to understand? You'll say, yes, that was the beginning. But as he grew and expanded his containers, he's able to absorb more and more. And that's what Avodah is. It's growing to the point that now you have the containers for it. Now you can contain more and more. What yesterday would have overwhelmed you, or 10 years ago would have overwhelmed you, or completely obliterated or nullified you, now something you can absorb and integrate. And this is a journey that everyone goes through. That's why a good teacher knows you have to always teach something and leave something above the student's head. Then at some point, the student will be able to internalize that, and then you continue climbing the mountain, and then the horizons continue to expand to the point where, like he says here, that's the whole point of Avodah, that you can begin to internalize the Yichud Tato, Yichud Law, and relatively speaking, this highest levels of how Atzmus sees it. Obviously, we will never be Atzmus. He doesn't say here you become Atzmus. He says that we too are told, we have to find a way to unite the two and come to understand that it's not two levels, that they come together. So we will never be God. That's a clear thing. There's only one God. But God is allowing us. Remember, he also gave us a soul. We were created in the divine image. He gave us a mind that he created. So he gave us many resources that remind us that we have the DNA of godliness within us. That's what a soul is about. I'm adding something more. So besides our own avodah of expanding, we also have plenty to work with. Every one of us is taught the entire Torah in our mother's womb. So there are many things that we have available for us, but it ultimately does not happen on its own. It will happen only through hard work. Just like people who, through exercise, through conditioning, can run marathons of 25 miles when you never would imagine. Like 5 years ago, they could even run 1 mile. And say many. I mean, every area of growth really fits into this formula.
Thank you.
I hear and
Robin, let me ask you something. What I just said is new to you, or you heard this before?
It's not new, but I have to confess I have not been able to attend a lot of the classes recently because of some stuff.
No, it's not just classes. It's I almost say it in almost every class. This is like there's an undercurrent in everything. What I just said now is not just some type of side note. It's
I guess the problem
is the
I have
essence
is,
of all growth. It's basically how we retrace the steps and grow.
I understand that, but at the same time, so it's a paradox because you also say that Hashem is infinite. We can't, where there is no relative to Hashem.
Yeah, but I just said we have a piece of that infinite in us that he gave us, and we have Avodah. Our work allows us to open up doors that initially may be difficult to access.
I understand. So is this the way it's going to be when Mashiach is here, that we don't have to do Avodah anymore, or we're still going to
No, there'll always be Avodah. It just won't be with evil. You won't have to fight the negative, but you'll always need Avodah to go from one level of light to a higher level of light.
Okay, thank you.
Just
I
a
heard
quick
it,
thing.
go ahead. Go ahead.
The Avodah is not going to help without the infinite that we have in our soul.
Avodah you need Avodah to reveal it. If you don't do Avodah, it's not going to just emerge.
Right, but also, if you don't have the infinite in ourselves, you could make Avodah as much as you want. You won't reach it.
That's why I said both things.
Tzvi,
All
did you
of
have a
Tanya is
question?
based on this.
Yeah,
First, Tanya talks about what you can achieve through your efforts. Then we're told that all of us have a deep hidden love that is embedded within our DNA. That's exactly the point. You need both. Ultimately, Avodah is the key to everything. But obviously, just like a person who can run a 25-mile marathon. If he doesn't have the muscles, the potential, he's never going to run it no matter how much exercise he does. So obviously it has to be in there, but then you have to work to reveal it. Anyway, go ahead. Next question.
It seemed like the Rebbe Rashab, I know he didn't complete it, all the questions, but it seems like he, at some level, at least, maybe consciously even knew that this is the end. He maybe had to fill in stuff. It seems like, even you mentioned it before, that this is such a intense, full page. It seems like he knew this is the end, and maybe he was going to work back. Does that make any sense?
But bottom line is, if you only read this, you wouldn't have the answer to the question. He doesn't answer the question of how you transform the animal soul, for example. And if you continue reading the Mittler Rebbe, he does answer. Now, I've been teaching it with full knowledge of what the answer is. Remember also, so I keep bringing up what is going to be said in the Mittler Rebbe, even though I don't say it yet explicitly because we haven't learned it inside. But if you stopped right here, you're left with, when we started this whole review, if you remember, I spelled out, I think, 5 or 6 themes and questions that were left unanswered. The fact that you feel that you have them answered is, I would say, mostly credit because I'm teaching it that way. I'm not trying to take credit for that. But by reading this alone, can you extrapolate? Yeah, if we didn't have the Mittler Rebbe, we'd have no choice and have to try to figure out what all this leads to. But you see, he doesn't even mention the animal soul here, even though in 1466 he did. So that's exactly why we're learning the other Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, because they will help us understand where the Rebbe Rashab is going here. Whether he knew he wouldn't finish, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. It doesn't. What difference does it make? Bottom line is, it's definitely not finished. The Rebbe Rashab never leaves anything not said. Anything that he began, he ends. So bottom line is, certain things he just doesn't say. Of course you can figure out if you work hard enough. Some things maybe you can't figure out. We'll see. I haven't yet even explored that because I wanted to first do what we're doing. Go back to the Mittler Rebbe, see how the Mittler Rebbe finishes it. Go back to Torah, see how the Alter Rebbe does. And then we can go back and see is anything left that needs more explanation, etc.
I wasn't saying anything so profound. I thought maybe all the stuff he's going to answer that he passed away before he could answer them would be like inside, and this would be like a suitable ending the way it is. That's all.
Everything is Ashgacha Pratis. This was meant to be. I understand that, but when you have a mimer of the Mittler Rebbe that continues where this leaves off, to me that's a tremendous gift. Maybe the Rebbe Rashab knew that we would find the Mittler Rebbe's mimer, and therefore he knew that we would be able. He gave us enough signs to know to learn that mimer, because he does mention it earlier, much earlier on page 1352. He does mention the mimer from the Alter Rebbe, so it could be that he knew that we would do exactly what we're doing right now.
My question, it kind of relates a little bit to Robin's question. I heard in Robin's question something a little bit different that didn't get addressed, which sort of relates to my question. Her question is, what happens if we're going to try and accomplish these 3 perspectives and ultimately the Yichud of Yichudim, which requires us to understand reality on God's terms, which is Yichud Ilah, then what's left of our separate identity? So, for example, you told a joke about the chassid who sort of insulted the philosopher. It was very subtle, and he said, I envy you think about God all day, whereas I just think about myself all day. And of course, the punchline was everything's God, and I sort of try and want to figure out what do I fit in on it. And then so the question is, if you're going to contemplate that everything's godliness and that we are just an expression of godliness, the chitzonius. And then he even said, Hayinu ilu yitzuru, if you could imagine an expression of godliness, as it says, without Havdalah, where there's no helam, there's just God, pure godliness, even though it's just a part of it. Okay, so if we're supposed to see ourselves on those terms, where does that leave the individual identity? Because we're necessarily seeing ourselves as a chelek kol mamish, but we're actually part of God. And we're not God, but we're part of God. So where does that leave our separate identity? Which sort of leads me to my question.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just trying to give you two questions. You maybe answer them in one punch, which leads me to like how are we to conduct ourselves in let's say Yemoshe Mashiach. You mentioned Yom Kippur, where most of us, let's say, try to get to the best place, the best us we can be, if you can say that. And as we are, the best us we can be, which is a very, very modest, hopefully modest person who's doing everything they can to be contemplative of what the Eibishter wants from us and to be proper towards other people and proper towards ourselves, etc. It's almost like the perfect expression of ourselves. Is that how we're supposed to? Basically, that's what Yemos HaMashiach is supposed to look like. Is how each of us conducts ourselves in our day-to-day course of life.
Well, my answer to the question would be something I've spoken about many, many times. What many artists, athletes, authors, or all people in different ways talk about being in the zone. You know, there are times that, let's say, as a writer, I could say, I'm writing something and I have something very intentional that I want to convey. But it's not necessarily flowing seamlessly from my inner self and just getting on paper or on a computer. You know, there's a yesh, that's me, trying to communicate a godly idea, let's say. But then there's when you get into the zone and the object and the subject melt into one. Like the examples I've given, you're reading a book, you become so absorbed, you don't even realize it's a book. You don't even realize you're turning pages, and you definitely don't realize you're reading words. You could actually start crying and laughing and even perspiring. All you're doing is reading a book. Someone on the outside will say, hey, why are you? But the point is you become so consumed, so absorbed in the experience, or it could be a piece of art or nature, that you lose sense of your conscious self. So that's just a small example where you could be doing the right thing, but not lose sense of your conscious self. And then you could be doing the right thing, that all you are is an instrument of God's. So though I'm not a tzaddik and we're not tzaddikim, and maybe we can't envision completely what it means to be a Merkava, meaning a chariot that is 24/7 just expressing godliness in this world. But conceptually, it's not difficult to imagine. God blessed you or someone else with particular skills. Let's say writing skills, communication skills, people skills. You're a compassionate person. You're an intelligent person. I mean, whatever, all the skills and personality. So initially, these begin as your own skills that you use in your life, hopefully for the good things, hopefully to build good relationships, make money, succeed in whatever you're applying yourself to. I'm talking all ethically and morally, all fine. But it's you. I've succeeded. I've achieved my, I built my career. I built my empire. But then there comes a level where you come down to, and I'm not going through the 3 levels right now. Let's just go straight to the highest, where you completely know everything I do is just to bring godliness into this world. But I'm still using my personality and my strengths. Still you. You're not becoming somebody else. Because remember, God did choose you. He says, even from Atzmus' point of view, he doesn't say there's no yesh. He doesn't say there's no his galus. There is his galus. He wants creation. He wants an existence. However, in truth, that existence, all it is an expression of the divine. So there's an expression of the divine that doesn't have any shape and form. And then there's an expression of the divine that does have a shape and form. That's you and me. When Hashem said, I want you to be born, and I'm giving you a neshama, and your neshama is shenasate b'tahori, shachzate b'nishmasi every morning. And this neshama comes into a body, and it has a unique personality. Your personality is different than mine. Ein deis ein shavus. We think differently. We have different approaches to things, different skills. All of this is me wanting. I envisioned a particular type of neshama in this world. When you come to realize that, and you say, so I'm here, hineni, I'm here to serve. All I am here is to ani nivresi l'shamash eskeni, or ani lo nivresi ela l'shamash eskeni. I am your instrument, God. I will do whatever. So everything I do is not building my own career. Everything is to bring godliness. Kol ma shebara kodesh baruch hu be'elamai le'bara ela l'chvayde. Everything is just, and loy ela means nothing else. Now, this is the highest level. This doesn't mean we begin. For many of us, it begins just not being a yesh, and at least once a day, give a little tzedakah, be a little kind, try to be compassionate. That's like the beginning stages. But ultimately, a person who can achieve a level where they see themselves complete instruments all the time, they still maintain who they are, but they don't think about themselves. They never think about them. I think only one thing: what does God want of me? Can we all reach that 24/7? I would think most probably not. But can someone reach that once in a while when they say Shema? I see no reason relative to each one of us. But I wouldn't begin with that. If I was leading a minyan or a prayer workshop, I wouldn't say let's start with level 3. I'd start with level 1. Let's just get yourself aligned to God. Train somebody to just at least. Let's even use an example with athletes. The early stages of training, or music for that matter, you don't teach them the highest levels of training. You teach them let's get the discipline in place. Learn how to sit at a piano in the right way. Learn how to touch the keys. Learn how to maneuver. Once you learn to do that, then we're going to go deeper and you're going to become better. Then there comes a point, any musician will tell you, a good musician, like a good writer, there's a point where you and the instrument become like one. It's not like you're hitting keys. You become literally like one. The instrument just becomes an extension of your fingers, which are an extension of your feelings. And you can see that real masters, that their feelings are just the instrument. They're just a flow. I remember when I moved from writing with pen and paper to a typewriter, it wasn't easy because the typewriter was already a foreign entity. And it takes a while for you to start typing as you would be writing. The same thing with the computer. But then as you grow and you train yourself, you acclimate yourself, so-called the kalim become more aligned with the to the point that they flow together seamlessly. I'm just giving some examples where we can have an identity we're aware of and it's aligned, an identity perhaps, or you come to a point where God is everything and you completely disappear, so to speak. But the real goal is the yichud of the two yichudim. I don't want to go through all three right now because it requires more discussion, but I wanted to answer your question. So now when Mashiach comes, remember, behind us we have 5,784 years of Golus. Well, I don't say all years of Golus, but since the beginning of creation, with all the struggles and the Mesiras Nefesh. So you can imagine 5,784 years of Avodah is more than 40 years that the student needs to reach the depths of their teacher, with all the pain and all the suffering, which all refined us. So we are at a place, when we say we're ready for Mashiach, is because collectively and accumulatively, we've reached a place of refinement that we can manifest godliness in the deepest possible ways. And many ways, what the Zohar says, the advent of technology, our political freedoms, all the points the Rebbe makes that the world is ready for Mashiach, didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened with thousands of years of tremendous suffering in the worst possible way, and tremendous Mesiras Nefesh that ultimately, literally broke and refined the very materialism and hedonism of this physical world to be a keli telekus. And that's why we see all these breakthroughs in science and medicine and so on. We see that as all a form of divine expression. So bottom line is, I just gave some examples to explain how we can both exist, while also be a complete instrument of the divine.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very, very articulate, helpful answer. Thank you very much.
I just want to add
But-
that I think that the idea of losing yourself when you're in the middle of some creative process is a very good example, because you're still there, but you don't have an awareness of yourself. You're
Exactly. And you
Yeah.
could be up in the middle of the night, you don't feel tired, you don't feel hungry, and then suddenly you realize, you say, hey, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and I haven't eaten, like, I mean, I'm sure I've experienced it many times. It's unbelievable feeling, and you can't really like press a button, get there. You do what you got to do, and then you get into that zone. In other words, you can't force the zone on you, right? It happens at some point. You get there when you're immersed long enough.
We'll now call it the Yichud zone.
Good, that's good.
But obviously, even if you're coming to this level, Miyachad Yichud Dato and Yichud Elo, if you compare it to a big tzaddik that the hymn, the Yichud Elo, is real. It's different than our level of Miyachad Zayin, correct?
Obviously, that's why I'm saying it's all relative. Obviously, I don't even know if we could imagine. I mean, I look at the Rebbe. I remember a journalist asked me once something about, it was the Rebbe's maybe yahrzeit or birthday, I don't remember. But he asked me something. He says, "Tell me something." You know, he follows my writings. You know, he's a very intelligent guy. So he says to me, "Tell me something about the Rebbe that you think is really unique." So I don't know what came to me. I said to him, "He's a man that anytime you give me any date and any time of the day, I can tell you exactly what he was doing, or almost exactly." So he said to me, 1964 or 1963, June 2 at 4 p.m. So I looked up what day in the week it was, and I said, the Rebbe just finished davening mincha, and he was in his room, most likely answering questions. He says, "How do you know?" I didn't look, because I said the Rebbe's 24/7 was so part of, he had no other agenda. He didn't go on vacation. He never disappeared, you know. And a journalist started laughing. He says, "I don't even know what I did 5 days ago, let alone I don't even want to know sometimes." You know, so I'm just giving a very, I guess, pragmatic example of a person who's 24/7 on call. And like a soldier on the front line, you know exactly where he is. And he's constantly at service. So can I even imagine it? I remember times I would walk by the Rebbe's room, like after finishing work, 4 a.m., and his lights were on. And I would say to myself, unbelievable. Here's a man that literally, like we all have, you work, there's a deadline, and you know, after the deadline, I'm going on a trip with my wife, or I'm going to a simcha, or I'm going somewhere. We all have in our lives, for our own sanity, we have so-called milestones, we have deadlines, schedules, you know, the beginning of a project, the end of a project. And here I realize there's a man that just never stops. It's like a relentless sea that the waves never stop. It's just always on call, and he's always serving. It's not something I think that most of us are capable of. We are capable at times like that. That's why I said the zone. But yeah, I mean, and to me, that's not even really necessarily describing what a tzaddik is, because a tzaddik goes even beyond what I just said. But I'm talking about it more in a way that we can somewhat relate to. I don't know if I cut you off, Rab Shlomo. I know that you were saying something about a tzaddik. I just wanted to acknowledge, yeah, a tzaddik is a whole different level.
No, you didn't. You said the right things.
Okay. No, look, the beauty and the eloquence of this is that you have a template here of growth, of how a person grows from being a self-absorbed individual to becoming a servant and a person who serves others and serves the world, and just becomes a, lack of a better word, a merkava, a vehicle, a channel for something greater than they are. It's really what it comes down to in simple English. And it's just levels of how deep we reach, how far we reach.
I just wanted to put in a plug while we're still recording for the class you gave at the Kollel on the a week ago. I think it was last Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah, last Thursday, yeah.
You posted it, and I posted it again with an endorsement. And I just wanted to highly encourage people to listen to it. It is such a intense, concentrated explication of Chassidus. It's not just about the Maimer Basiligani and Perek Yud Dalid, but it touches on a lot of the themes we're talking about here. In particular, it talks about the Otzros and how the Orain Sof expresses itself Lamata Arin Tachas, all the way to the lowest of the low, the darkest of the dark. And then he finishes the class talking about how it also reaches to the highest heights. And the point of the matter is the resources that the Eibishter gives us in order to help us to accomplish these levels. And it's a very clear explanation of how essentially these two perspectives, Daas Elyon, Daas Tachton, Daas Elyon, and the Yichud of them. In my opinion, he didn't say it exactly like that, maybe a little bit, but there's a lot there, and I just would encourage people to listen to that class. It's a very intense, concentrated Chassidus, so you're going to have to keep up with him. But it's not just any old lecture. And maybe the rabbi is very modest and humble. He did it in 36 minutes, but I just want to encourage my classmates, really, if you want some help wrapping your head around some of these concepts in metaphysical terms, and also to make it practical so you can understand linkage between the esoteric and the practical, I highly encourage you to listen to that lecture. It's really, all of his lectures are amazing, but this one in particular, I found very helpful. And I don't think it's a coincidence it coincides with Basti Ligani, that just very helpful stuff. Anyways, want to make an endorsement.
I very much appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, I heard from many people comments on that, because you can get sometimes lost in all the details. It's important to, and there's no question that Basti Ligani, as I explained it, was informed a lot about what we're learning in Ayin Beis, for sure, about Helam and Gilui.
Yeah, just blew my mind when it really brought home to me also how many times someone really has to study a mimer to really get it. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, so this is unbelievable. What should I say? It's like a real blueprint.
Yeah, but your mastery, just at all these different levels of explanation, is really also mind-blowing. So thank you. And I don't know how you do it sitting there staring at a camera. I mean, it's one thing to sit in a class and lecture, but really to stare at a camera and give it all over like that. I mean, I stare at a camera and I just wonder how I look.
I don't even see the camera anymore. I only see people, to be honest. It's like the zone. I don't see the camera. I just see, at some point, it's like the typewriter I mentioned. You lose sight of the instruments, and they just become the energy that's flowing.
Is the Yichud from Yichud and Yichud Elyon. That's happened for you.
Halavai. It's a little taste of it. Yeah, I do know what it is, but honestly, it happens sometimes when I speak in public. If I'm in the zone, that's when it really flows. You just look. I mean, over the years, I've absorbed a lot. I've listened to the Rebbe for many, many, many years. I've written, and it comes back. Like when people say to me, "How long did it take you to write your book, Toward a Meaningful Life?" So I say 40 years and 4 months. The 4 months were the actual writing, and the 40 years was the training. But like it is, Al-Havdil, they say about the World Series or a Super Bowl, that for some reason a player with experience has a whole different edge on even a very talented one without experience. There's something about experience that like trains you, that you almost reflexively and impulsively just have the right way of things flowing through you. And if you can achieve that, it doesn't always happen, but the more you achieve that, it just works. But you have to also have confidence that you have something to say. It's not just open your mouth and just begin. You have to feel that. And to be honest, emotional, being personal and emotional, like words from the heart enter the heart. The words from the heart, when you speak from your heart, it's a lot easier to reach that place than when you speak from your brain. If you get up and try to explain things intellectually, sometimes you'll do it well, and sometimes not so well. But if you speak from your heart and you bring an emotional dimension to it, and people feel you care, there's empathy, the flow, it definitely opens up and makes the channels much smoother and more seamless in this Yichud Ilah, Yichud Tata discussion.
Can I ask just personally, when you gave that lecture, for example, would you say you were in the zone, or this is so this so rock stone cold bread and butter that for you it's like a professor giving a lecture, or are you in the zone when you're giving it over?
I was pretty much in the zone, but it was a combination. I had read, obviously, the mimer. I was looking at the mimer for the last few weeks, learning the chapter 14. Learning the Rebbe's mimer. I also follow sometimes the different chats about this mimarim, and I see how people talk about it. So because I have a lot of experience, and I also read up, and I saw, for some reason, I'm able to process it quickly, and I was able to just cut to the main core issues. I saw many of the classes were so focused on certain lines, like they forgot the woods. They only were looking at the trees, and they forgot the forest. So to me, what comes natural to me is that it has to be context of the mimer. That's the first thing I said there. That's not just chapter 14. It's after 13 chapters, and it continues, and it's part of a larger theme. So those things come natural to me because I know that's how you have to look. But I definitely looked at the Maimer, and I look also to find key lines sometimes from the Rebbe, where the Rebbe says, this chapter adds this point. I look for those like punchlines. And because I have experience, I'm able to find them quicker. So I think it's a combination. I didn't just get up there and just wing it. Not that I probably could do that because I do have experience and I have learned it before. But in this case, I did look, and I was very much, I guess, for me, the big thing, lamata mata ad tachlis and ma'al and ketz. I think I've been thinking about it for years, but especially recently, because they're like really challenge. Really, I was really not clear why the Maimer in Bas Lagani keeps talking about lamata mata ad tachlis when he wants to reach lamata ad ketz. So when you're bothered by something long enough, you ultimately get the answer. So I think just struggling with that and thinking about it, even when I walk in the street, all helped me formulate what I said there.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
It's like when you live with it, I'm sure all of you have something that really bothers you or something really troubling, and you keep thinking about it all day and all night, and it's an obsession. Then at some point there's a breakthrough because just the thinking about it, even if you don't find the answer immediately, after a while, things begin to emerge, You've had that?
Yeah, 100%. I wish I had it more often, but yeah.
You just have to know in this frustrating stage when you don't have the answers yet, you have to know that if you keep at it, you will have a breakthrough. That's the key. Many people give up because they say, okay, I don't understand it, let me move on. I never give up. When it comes to these things, even if I don't understand it, I'll keep at it. I'll keep sometimes articulate, I'll go back to square one. What's the main point in the first place? And what's the question? You keep going back to it. So even if you don't get this, some point, something breaks through. Part of you got to be, you have to have a lot of perseverance. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, clearly. In the last class, you were struggling, it seemed, with Ian on this issue of expression without Hagbala. But it seemed to me you did explain it. You weren't sure, but I don't know. Do you think you got it, or have you had any further thoughts about that?
I think I got it, but I'll be honest. I train myself never to be 100% definitive unless I really see, it's very clear. So I just share that. A lot of things when I share some of my questions or doubts, because I'm sharing my teaching process, because I want you to know. I'm also here to teach you how to learn, and part of learning is you learn something, you want to make sure. So I will say that I think that's pshat. I'm not trying to be humble. I'm trying to just be honest. That I'm not always, and it usually helps because I don't like to just say this is it. I'm 100% sure. There are things I say that very often at the class because I am convinced because I see what it says and it's very clear to me that's what it means. But when it comes to some of the more subtle things, there are times, I've done this many times, I go back and then sometimes I realize that I really read it wrong or something like that. In this case, I would stand by what I said with his galus. I'll tell you what's bothering me most. It's a chiddush I haven't seen elsewhere. So I'm wondering, is he really saying something so new? Because usually, as I said, existence is yesh ma'ayin also from God's point of view. Here it would appear that from God's point of view, it's not yesh ma'ayin even. It's his galus. It's just he created something. So what? So some things he reveals through and some things he creates. He creates a stone. So because I haven't seen it elsewhere, so I'm more hesitant to say that this is the definitive final say. But I still think that's what is a chiddush. This is galus piece that he keeps repeating. And I also understand why he's saying it, because it's very much part of, because he wants to ultimately say that the nefesh habamis and the yesh are not, as much as they're yesh ma'ayin, as in from their point of view, they have nothing in common with God, but from God's point of view, it's just another expression of God. If a nefesh habamis could understand that, it would be much more likely the nefesh habamis will love God, because it's not about me being eliminated. It's about me revealing my true nature, which is godliness.
Correct. You're getting very close to the punchline of the plot. You didn't say it, but we're very close to the
No,
punchline.
I don't have to hesitate. I just know that we're going to read inside the Mittler Rebbe. So I don't want to be jaded beforehand. I want to really read how the Mittler Rebbe is going to say it. But I know that it's part of this story here. But since the Mittler Rebbe is going to speak about it, I'd rather him say, then we can go ahead and explain whatever we want to explain. So it's not like,
it's
it
very
makes
true.
it much more. It makes it much more understandable than we are saying that this is his galus, because nothing is a creation, because it can be something beside him.
yeah, but you have to be careful because we're told Beresh is bara, even though he said bara is lashon gilui, but we say brara, yesh ma'ayin, creation. You know, we don't want to go like Aristotle, that existence is just an extension of godliness, as in yesh miyesh, because that he negates earlier. So in other words, there's a part of creation that's completely new, but there's a part of it that's just an expression of the divine. That's the key thing, is that we cannot see ourselves, that we are just, there is a yesh here, there is a creation of something that is ex nihilo, yesh ma'ayin. That's why you have to know how to balance the two. See what I'm saying?
But this yesh is his galus.
From God's point of view, not from ours.
Yeah.
So that needs to be discussed. What does that mean? Even after we discover that the yesh is just an expression of godliness, then the question is, so then what makes it a yesh? What makes it a yesh? A yesh as in, what I mean, that not the question we talked about before. I mean, what makes it a yesh as in yesh ma'ayin? Why do we say there's nothing in common with it? So is the meaning that once you know there's nothing in common, then you can work your way back and come to say, 1 second, there's nothing in common on its own. Existence has no value of its own. Only God gives it value. Once you know that, then it's an extension of God's value and expression. That's probably the way to understand.
Yeah.
The only hard thing to understand here, I think, Revitzok asked 2 weeks
like in other words,
ago.
if a guy gets up and
Klipper.
suddenly says, like this was the mistake that the Frankistan made. Hey, since I'm a yesh created by God, so every taiva I have, every sexual desire is all part of godliness. It's all part of God's expression. So I can do whatever I want, which was what some people misunderstood and distorted Kabbalah and turned it into Shalosh Klippos Atmeis Mamish. Understand? That's why you have to be very careful. You can't say that I don't want to use an orgy or pure violence. Oh, it's all part of godliness. It's all his galus of Atzmus. That's not the case at all. See what I mean? So you have to be very careful when you discuss this. That's part of why it's such a subtle area.
Yeah.
This is
100%.
hard to understand how his galus create klippos.
Okay, so that's why a few days ago, Esri Yitzchak asked me that question, and I spoke about it. Say Nechanami, that gets into the Helam, and how the Helam could be misunderstood, and it could ultimately create through Bchira and so on. It's true. That needs explanation. I totally agree. Because
The
that's the
explanation
difference.
there was very helpful.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Because the
go ahead.
ayin of the yesh amiti will not allow for the creation of klippos, because it's complete bittul. It's only the ayin of the yesh anivra, even though from Atzmus' point of view it's just as galus, but that allows because it goes through a tzimtzum, and the tzimtzum, when it's misunderstood, can lead to the worst evil. I mean, I think we should we're
all
turning
very
into a
excited
longer
about this.
farbrengen now, but
Well, we're all very excited. We're just all very excited about this.
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
really tachlis. It's all really tachlis.
that's good. No, good, absolutely. I mean, it's what should I say? It's just mind blowing, because I can tell you, before I learned Chassidus, though I wasn't old enough, sophisticated enough to appreciate, but all these type of questions about where evil fits in, or even what we're discussing now, do we have independence? Did God create or not? When you just learn Nigla, Talmud, and Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't go there. And it's like fundamental questions of any thinking person. It's when I saw Chassidus talk about it, that's when I realized, wow, this is like, it gets to the core of issues. But I can tell you, I know many people who went through yeshiva and never heard any of this. And they feel that Judaism is only about a set of laws, like, do's and don'ts. And so it's a lot of mechanical, cultural dogma, and that's it.
I share your passion, and that's exactly why it's lit me up for the same reason. It enriches Nikla beyond proportion, beyond explanation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense. It gives it a logic, an inner logic of why the technical details matter, because there's a bigger
picture, a bigger plot going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we had a little additional
Amazing
bonus
class.
here.
Beautiful
Amazing
discussion.
class.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. I hope everybody's well. Let me, I didn't even stop the recording. Let me stop it right now. So we're just a few lines from the